Hey there, me again. So in today's video, this is a special one for a couple reasons. The first reason being my hair is exactly 1 year long today. So if you watch Bray Hunziker's videos and you like those, but you miss his long hair, you can come over here and get your fix, I guess. Other than my hair, the other reason today is a special day is because we're talking about a interesting little camera that I like to use, and that is the Ricoh R1. So the Ricoh R1 was a point-and-shoot camera that was made from 1994 to 1998, I believe, and it is the fully automatic cousin of the Ricoh GR1, which is a really cool film camera for street photographers. It's also a point-and-shoot, but it's a little bit more professional or higher grade, and it's got like exposure compensation, and you can overwrite the DX code reader and stuff like that on the GR1. This, you cannot do that, but it's a pretty cool camera still, and it's fully automatic, so really anybody can use it and get into film, which is kind of cool. So the Ricoh R1 is equipped with a 30mm 3.5 lens, and it's got a few different modes. So it's got normal, which is the standard 30mm, and then it has a switch on the back that you can go to a P for panorama, and then wide P. You can hear the lens kind of did something there, and that changes it from 30mm to 24mm, and it's also panorama. So a few different modes there, and I'll tell you guys how that works. So you can see when you pop open the back that the panorama mode is not actually a true 35mm frame in the panorama format. It's got curtains that come down, and it basically just crops your photo within a 35mm frame. So you're not getting a true 35mm panorama, which is kind of whack, but it's interesting that they kind of decided to do that. But if you're really shooting with this camera, I would honestly just keep it on the normal mode, or another sort of mod that people do that I'll talk about in a second, because you can just crop afterwards and get the same effect. To be fair though, it does have adjustable frame lines for when you go to Panorama Mode. It changes the frame lines so that you can see in the viewfinder what you're framing up. So I guess there's that. So how it works for the wide Panorama Mode is when you switch it to that, you can hear the lens does something. And basically what it does is it backs up the lens so that you get a wider field of view, but you're not changing the focal length actually. And it's also, what it's doing is it's making it so that the 3.5 aperture now is a minimum of f8 to compensate for any sort of sharpness loss. And you're also stuck in the panorama mode because there's going to be vignetting around the edge if you were not in panorama. So there is a little mod that people tend to do with this camera, which is pretty interesting. You can basically take a little tiny piece of plastic or like a toothpick and chop it in half, and basically hold those curtains up so that you can actually use the full 24mm focal length on the full frame. And honestly, quality-wise, it's usable. It's definitely not as sharp, though, as just shooting on normal mode. So this camera does have autofocus, which is cool, and it works pretty well. It's a really simple sort of 3-zone autofocus, so when you look in the viewfinder, you can see that there's 3 zones sort of right in the middle on the viewfinder. But it works pretty well for framing up, and it doesn't really miss focus very often, so that's good. The lens is also technically a macro lens, so you can get as close as about 35 centimeters, I think, which is pretty close, and you can get some really cool shots like that. So if you look on the top of the camera, you'll see that there are 3 different buttons, and these are to cycle through all the different modes. So the first is a flash mode button, so you've got red eye compensation, you've got flash on, flash off, and then there is a slow sync flash. Then you've got a timer button that you can use with a remote, or you can just set it to a 10-second timer, which is pretty useful if you want to take pictures with your friends and stuff. And then there's a mode dial, which cycles you through some like specialty modes, and it'll show you the modes on the top display. So there's a super night mode, which basically auto selects all the settings based on the light available, and it'll choose whether or not to focus to infinity and what type of flash to use. Another mode you've got is landscape mode, which will automatically focus to infinity, and this is really useful if you're shooting like in fog or in snow or anything, so then it won't focus on like close snow or anything that's falling in front of your frame. The last mode is just a box with a dot around it, and that's basically the single autofocus mode. So you can, if I look at the camera, I can focus, pre-focus on the camera, and then once I press the shutter, it'll just instantly take it. And that's really useful if you're taking pictures of like fast moving objects or somebody doing something really fast. You can make sure you get that shot. So this camera has a DX code reader. So when you put your film in, it's automatically going to read what type of film you've got in the camera, and it'll read from 50 to 3200 ISO films. Other than that, it's going to be preset at 100. This camera also takes a CR2 battery, which, at least where I live, costs like $12 a piece. So it's definitely something to keep in mind if you're wanting this camera or a point and shoot like it that takes a CR2 battery. Something to watch out for with these cameras is the LCD tends to die on these cameras, and you'll be left like seeing partial numbers on the frame counter and partial images of the modes, and it'll be hard to tell what mode you're in. So that's one downside to the electronics in this camera. Mine hasn't had really any issues except for on the numbers. Sometimes the numbers are cut off, but I can always see what type of flash mode I'm in, if the timer's on, what type of mode the camera's in, so I at least know what I'm shooting. I just might not know how many frames I've got left. Speaking of frames, this camera loads in an interesting way. So you just put the film canister in one side and pull the spool to the other side, like any normal camera. But when you close the back, it automatically rolls out all the film. And then once it stops making noise, you can take pictures. And as it takes pictures, it rolls the film back into the canister. And that's pretty cool, just because, like, say you hand this off to somebody and they don't really know what they're doing and they accidentally pop the film back open, any of the images you already took will be loaded into the canister already and they won't get exposed to light. So that's pretty cool. In terms of the lens is pretty sharp, at least when you're using it in normal mode. On Panorama Mode, it's definitely a little bit grainier and a little bit less sharp, but still usable for sure. And I'm really happy with the results that I've gotten when just shooting in normal mode. And that's usually what I leave it on 90% of the time. I haven't really gotten into that mod yet where you open the curtains and shoot at the 24mm focal length, but I'd like to try it because other than some vignetting, I really like the results I've seen out of this camera when people mod them like that. So some good things about this camera: one, it's really small. And that's really good because you can always have it with you. You can put it in your pocket or you can take it in a little carrying case. I actually have a Ricoh carrying case that I just put on my belt, and it's really convenient. I just don't even know it's there. And it's not cumbersome at all. It's just nice to have, and it's a really good camera if you want to get into film and you don't really want to be taken out of the moment. And you don't want to worry about framing and composition and camera settings and all that. This is a good camera you can just take around with you, take some pictures, and they'll have that cool film look. So I got this camera at an estate sale for $5, which actually is an incredible price for this camera. I wasn't going to buy it originally, but I looked it up before I put it back, and on eBay these cameras go from anywhere from like $150 to $300. So it's definitely a good buy for $5, especially considering the LCD mostly works. So who is this camera for? Well, it's kind of a tough thing to say because it's kind of overpriced in my opinion for what it is. But this is definitely a camera for people wanting to get into film or just have that film look, and they don't want to worry about the technical aspects of taking photos like composition or worrying about camera settings or anything like that. So if you just want a nice little camera to have with you at any time, this is definitely a good option. But if you're looking for something a little bit more professional, something that you can learn the rules of composition and exposure, like the exposure triangle and stuff like that, I would maybe go for something else, like an SLR or maybe a cheap rangefinder if you can find one, because this isn't really going to teach you a lot about photography. It's just fun to have and capture moments with. But anyways, that's about it on the Ricoh R1. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope it was helpful, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye now.